Hello, recruit, and welcome back to Astroneer Academy. We hope you enjoyed your break after our first quarter. This quarter in Astroneer Academy, you'll become familiar with the entire civil planetary system, learn how to produce and utilize advanced resources, master new jet-powered forms of transportation, identify key strategies in base building, meet some adorable new friends, and even complete a network that will allow you to teleport to practically any location in mere seconds. Before we get to all of that though, we need to begin with Astroneer Academy 201, Space Travel. As you have explored Silva, you may have gazed into the sky and discovered several celestial bodies passing by. Each and every one of them, including the star at the center of it all, are places that you can visit fairly simply. Each of these astronomical bodies have their own unique characteristics, with most of them offering a variety of resources to collect and hazardous flora to avoid. There are only 2 locations that lack resources, but we won't be visiting those until much later in Astroneer Academy. We will take an in-depth look at nearly all of the locations in the civil planetary system next week in an Astroneer Academy Extra. Before you can visit all those places, however, you need transportation. While your rover and other land-based vehicles can definitely be modified to escape the gravity of Silva and journey to other planets, that isn't really what they were made for. Thankfully, we have shuttles. We have 3 of them, in fact. Of course, there is also a mission to complete to help you get started with your first shuttle. Open up the mission log and check out the To Parts Unknown mission. You need to print a small shuttle, oxygenator, and solid fuel thruster. Well, except you don't actually have to print one of those items, but we'll talk about that in a few minutes. First, let's take a look at all 3 shuttles. The small shuttle is unlocked in the research catalog for 1500 bytes and is crafted from 2 aluminum. All 3 shuttles are crafted on the large printer. The small shuttle features 2 medium Tier 2 storage slots. One is located on the bottom and is reserved for a thruster, and we'll talk more about the 2 thruster types in a moment. The other storage slot is located on the side of the shuttle, and while it will typically display the hologram for an oxygenator, it actually accommodates any medium Tier 2 or smaller item. The small shuttle will always be your very first shuttle, as you cannot create either the other 2 shuttles without first traveling to at least one other planet. The medium shuttle is unlocked in the research catalog for 3,750 bytes and is crafted from 2 ceramic and 1 aluminum alloy. It features the same 2 medium Tier 2 storage slots, but adds a cargo bay that has an additional 2 medium Tier 2 storage slots. By the way, we will soon be taking a look at a mission that will unlock the medium shuttle schematic as a mission reward, so you can save those bytes if you're willing to do a bit of space travel. There is also a mission that will unlock the large shuttle schematic for free, but we will not be covering that mission until much later in Astroneer Academy. It is worth pointing out that this mission will require completions of dozens of other missions before it, so many Astroneers opt to spend the bytes to unlock the large shuttle instead of waiting. The large shuttle is unlocked in the research catalog for 5,000 bytes and is crafted from 2 exochips, 1 titanium alloy, and 1 ceramic. It too features the same 2 medium Tier 2 storage slots as the other 2 shuttles, but its cargo bay offers considerably more storage with 2 large Tier 3 storage slots. While all 3 shuttles may appear to be capable of carrying only a single Astroneer, that simply is not true. The rover seats we discussed in Astroneer Academy 106 can be attached to a shuttle as well, providing seating for any additional friends who may have joined your instance of the training simulation. The small shuttle can accommodate 1 single rover seat, while the medium shuttle can accommodate up to 3. The large shuttle can even accommodate 2 of the large rover seats, with room for an additional small rover seat in the oxygenator compartment. If you utilize enough storage, you can populate a large shuttle with more seats than you would ever need in any instance of the training simulation, allowing for a truly galactic joyride. Note that control over the shuttle will typically default to the Astroneer who enters the shuttle first, regardless of the seat they occupy. Before you can blast off into space, all 3 shuttles require a thruster to be attached to the medium Tier 2 slot on the bottom. Once again, you have choices when it comes to thrusters. The solid fuel thruster is unlocked in the research catalog for 500 bytes and is crafted on the small printer from 1 ammonium and 1 aluminum. Like the small shuttle, you will absolutely have to begin your space travel with a solid fuel thruster, as the other thruster cannot be created until after you have collected resources that are not available on Silva. It should be noted that the solid fuel thruster is expendable, providing just 4 uses before it breaks down. Taking off from a planet and traveling to a different planet each consumes 1 use, meaning 1 solid fuel thruster will provide enough uses to make a full round trip from Silva to another planet and back again. There is a way to get practically unlimited usage from a single solid fuel thruster, and we will investigate that next week in an Astroneer Academy Quick Bite. If you do wind up expending a solid fuel thruster, you don't have to just let it lie about creating clutter. You can instead place it into a shredder and it will provide you with some scrap. We'll talk more about scrap in Astroneer Academy 202. The hydrazine thruster is your other choice for propelling your shuttles into space, and it is unlocked in the research catalog for 3,750 bytes and is crafted on the small printer from 1 exochip and 1 steel. Or you can get one for free from the Fuel for Thought mission, which we will discuss in Astroneer Academy 202. Regardless of how you obtain your hydrazine thruster, it is reusable, so it will not eventually break down as the solid fuel thruster does. The hydrazine thruster does require fuel in the form of hydrazine, however. You may have noticed that the hydrazine thruster features 3 small Tier 1 storage slots. Those are for attaching canisters of hydrazine. Each canister of hydrazine allows for 8 uses, and with 3 full hydrazine canisters attached, your hydrazine thruster will be ready for 24 uses. You can remove a hydrazine canister from the thruster anytime you wish should you find that you need that hydrazine for another use. Just be sure to replace it before you take off again. Both thrusters can be attached to any object with a medium Tier 2 storage slot, so, of course, this has led to many astroneers finding, shall we say, unconventional methods for space travel. We will take a look at some of those unconventional methods in Astroneer Academy 405. Now that you're familiar with all 3 shuttles and the 2 thrusters that propel them, let's talk about how to use the shuttle and some of their capabilities. Shuttles not only allow you to travel to other planets for exploration or to obtain rarer resources, but they can also be used as a means to travel around your current planet. Why drive halfway across Silva when you can fly there in a shuttle? Before you blast off for some planet hopping, however, it would be a good idea to understand some of the characteristics of the shuttle. Shuttles do provide a small amount of power. Very small, as in just 0.1 units per second. So while they can technically power any items attached to their storage, it's generally not a good idea to rely on that power. Additionally, the shuttles do not feature any power cable plugs, so they are unable to provide any power to any external items. Similar to the rover-class land vehicles we discussed in Astroneer Academy 106, shuttles will provide oxygen when you are near them. If you install an oxygenator in one of their storage slots, they will also allow you to create a tether network. The power from the shuttle will also flow via those tether lines, allowing your backpack to slowly recharge. Shuttles also communicate the fuel remaining in their thrusters and how many launches that fuel will allow. Simply hover the simulation cursor over your shuttle and pay attention to the lower portion of the tooltip to learn how much fuel you have remaining and how many launches that will allow. As I mentioned earlier, you do not really need to create a new oxygenator for a shuttle. In fact, if you think back to one of the Astroneer Academy 106 Quick Bites, you learn that a better strategy is to take a tractor, not an oxygenator. Yet the To Parts Unknown mission is instructing you to print an oxygenator. So, how do you get around that requirement? Good question, recruit. Let me show you by means of a pro tip. We start by unlocking the small shuttle in the research catalog, then creating it on the large printer. While that is printing, unlock the solid fuel thruster and print it on the small printer. Now unpack the shuttle and the thruster, then attach the thruster to the bottom of the shuttle. Next, go to your shelter. See that oxygenator that you placed in the shelter in Astroneer Academy 101? Pick it up and place it into the medium Tier 2 storage slot on the side of your small shuttle. Just like that, you have completed the To Parts Unknown mission. You can grab the oxygenator from the shuttle and put it back in your shelter. You can now collect your rewards for completing To Parts Unknown, which include another QTRTG, a solid fuel thruster, and a field shelter. I like to keep that extra solid fuel thruster packaged up to carry with me as a backup thruster in case something goes wrong during my travels. The field shelter is going to come in handy very soon in 2 other missions, and you can use the QTRTG however you'd like. I would recommend carrying 1 QTRTG in your backpack at all times, however. You never know when that small power producer may come in handy. We will look at one such scenario at the very end of today's course. Now that you have a shuttle ready, you're probably ready to jump in and blast off. But settle down, recruit, you haven't learned how to fly that shuttle yet. Before you attempt your first launch, you need to ensure your shuttle has a clear view of the sky. If it does not, you will be unable to launch. If this happens, you need to move your shuttle to an area where it is no longer obstructed. While this situation is fairly unlikely to occur when launching from your starting base on Silva, it can occur more frequently if you land your shuttle in a landing zone that's close to a gateway chamber. Additionally, you typically cannot launch a shuttle when it is underground, though there are exceptions to that rule that we'll cover in a later course. When you enter a shuttle, you're presented with 2 different options. Selecting Launch into Orbit, as the tooltip implies, launches you into orbit around the current planet. This will allow you to quickly travel around the planet. Launch to another planet, however, will launch you into space, where you will be presented with a view of all locations you can travel to. If you do not see the location you wish to travel to, simply rotate your view around until you see it. Hovering the simulation cursor over any destination in this view will reveal key details for each location, while selecting the location with a left mouse click or a right trigger on a controller will select that location and you'll begin traveling there. As we mentioned in the Astroneer Academy 106 Extra, the name of the destination that you are traveling to will also display briefly across the top of the simulation. Whether you have opted to launch into orbit or to another planet, you will soon be faced with the orbital view of a planet and the decision of where to land. Before we land, however, let's quickly look at how we can speed up or slow down our orbit around a planet. When in orbit, the tooltip of your shuttle will indicate controls for your orbiting speed. When the training simulation was still brand new, there was no way to control your orbiting speed. You would often find yourself slowly orbiting around a planet, waiting for your desired landing zone to appear. It would be years before Exodynamics implemented the orbiting speed control we have today. Speeding up allows you to quickly orbit around a planet, while slowing down will provide you with the opportunity to survey the area surrounding a landing zone, or even make it easier to select a landing zone. Each location you can travel to has numerous landing zones available, and you can even create your own. Naturally occurring landing zones appear as spherical areas with an indicator beacon containing 3 downward pointing arrows. Personally, I feel the indicators are overkill, as the landing zones are fairly easy to spot. But hey, we didn't create the simulation, we only teach you how to master it. You will also encounter cylindrical landing zones that will feature an indicator beacon containing an image of a rocket ship next to a launch pad. These landing zones will indicate the landing pad next to your starting shelter on Silva, any wrecked spaceports you have discovered, and landing pads that you have created and placed on the planet's surface. And yeah, you heard me correctly, you can actually use those wrecked spaceports as fully functional landing pads. The landing zones associated with a wrecked spaceport typically do not appear until you have discovered them while on the ground, however. Both types of landing zones, natural locations, and those associated with various landing pads, will provide information in a tooltip if you hover the simulation cursor over them. This is especially useful when attempting to return to your starting base on Silva. Sure, that landing zone is also accompanied by a shelter icon, but if you have placed additional shelters on Silva, that home base text in the tooltip can be helpful in locating your starting base. Landing zones are not the only things you can see from orbit. Any beacons that you have placed on the planet's surface will be readily visible while in orbit. That brings us to another pro tip to help you quickly travel to and from the same location repeatedly. If you do not deploy a shelter near a landing zone, it can be difficult to find that same landing zone when you make a return trip to a destination. You can avoid this scenario by simply placing the beacon near your shuttle when you land. Since beacons are visible from orbit, you'll be able to quickly identify your chosen landing zone and return to it with ease. We have already alluded to shelters being visible from orbit. Any shelter you place on the surface of a planet will be indicated by a shelter icon. Beacons and shelters are not the only things you'll see from orbit, however. If you met an untimely reprint and you have not yet reclaimed items from that discarded backpack, the death marker icon that you would typically see on your compass will also be clearly visible from orbit. Additionally, any fellow Astroneers who have joined you in your adventure will also be indicated by an Astroneer icon that is visible while in orbit. There are also a handful of missions that will create mission markers that are visible from orbit, but we will cover those missions beginning in an Astroneer Academy 203 Extra. There are other items you may see while in orbit. Gateway chambers located along the equator and occasionally those on the poles should be visible. Additionally, a quick visual inspection will usually give you an idea of the type of terrain and region you will encounter near a landing zone. You might even spot beautiful aurora borealis during certain limited time events. If your instance of the training simulation is operating on fairly powerful hardware, you may also be able to see large debris and perhaps even some unique points of interest that you may wish to visit. Okay, we've been stuck in orbit for long enough now, so let's move on. If you did not intend to launch into orbit, or if you find yourself in orbit around the destination other than the one you intended, you can easily launch to another planet while in orbit. Doing so will once again take you out to space, where you will once again have the opportunity to select a new destination. If you are in orbit around your intended planet, however, landing is as simple as hovering the simulation cursor over the chosen landing zone and left-clicking with a mouse, or using the control indicated in the shuttle tooltip to select a landing zone, then using the right trigger to begin landing. All of those natural landing zones and landing pads are great, but what if you want to set up a new base that is not located right next to one of those? For that, you will need to create your own landing pad. You can unlock the landing pad in the research catalog with 750 bytes and create it on a large printer from 2 ceramic and 1 aluminum. After you unpack a landing pad, you will need to deploy it before it can be used to land a shuttle. Simply place it on the ground and pay attention to the light in the center. If the light is orange, something is obstructing the expansion of the landing pad and you'll need to adjust its position. Once the light is green, you can interact with the landing pad to deploy it. To aid you in deployment, you should see a hologram of a deployed landing pad as you move it around. Each of the landing pads you create and deploy will be visible from orbit, and each one will contain a mission log, allowing you to check mission progress and collect mission rewards. There is one final thing to note about all landing zones. Whether they be natural landing zones, your home base, spaceport landing zones, or the landing zones from landing pads you create, each one of them can contain exactly one shuttle. If a shuttle already occupies a landing zone, then that landing zone will not be available for selection while in orbit. Whether you are tackling your adventure solo or with friends, it is not a bad idea to move your shuttle after you land. You do not need to move it very far. Simply moving it a few feet from its landing location will open up that landing zone for another shuttle to land. That will come in handy in the scenario we are about to discuss. Before we wrap up today, I want to talk about an unfortunate scenario that nearly every astroneer will eventually find themselves facing. While traveling from planet to planet, you miscalculated how many launches your solid fuel thruster had remaining, or you ran out of hydrazine before returning home. Now you're on a planet with no way to take off again. What do? Well, first of all, don't panic. You are not permanently stuck. You have a few options and even a couple of ways to avoid this scenario with proper planning. Let's assume you did not plan, however, and start with how you solve this predicament. The easiest solution would be to utilize the solid fuel thruster you received earlier as a reward for completing to parts unknown. If you do not have that thruster, or have already used it, there are a couple of other ways to get out of this predicament. Your first option is the most drastic. As we discussed in Astroneer Academy 102, you always have the option to respawn at your starting shelter on Silva. You will of course be leaving behind your current shuttle and its cargo, along with anything you are currently carrying in your backpack. Before you can return to space, you will need to craft a new shuttle and thruster as well. If you wish to recover your now abandoned shuttle at a later time, you will first need to create a large shuttle. Why a large shuttle? Because it's the only one with storage large enough to carry a package shuttle. Your second option will require a bit of time and work, but is not as drastic as the first. Every planet contains the resources necessary to create a solid fuel thruster. Before you rush off to gather laterite and ammonium, however, you need to start smaller. First, you need compound to create a small and a medium printer. After that, you will need enough resin and compound to create a smelter and platforms for the smelter and medium printer. You will also need a way to power everything, which means you will have to scout around for power producers located on debris or create small generators. You can skip the power producer hunt if you were paying attention earlier today when I mentioned it is a good idea to always carry at least one QT RTG in your backpack. Once you have both printers, the smelter, and the required platforms, you can now set out to locate ammonium and laterite. Laterite will almost always appear exclusively in the caves, while ammonium can be found in varying regions of every planet. Once you have one of each, smelt the laterite into aluminum, then use that aluminum and ammonium to craft a new solid fuel thruster. You could also utilize the Gateway Fast Travel Network to get out of this situation, but we won't be discussing that until Astroneer Academy 206. You can avoid this situation altogether with just a bit of planning. Next week, in an Astroneer Academy Quick Bite, you will learn how to get unlimited usage from a single solid fuel thruster. If you have already begun utilizing hydrazine thrusters, it is not a bad idea to carry extra hydrazine with you. In Astroneer Academy 106, you were introduced to the medium fluid and soil canister. As it turns out, hydrazine is the fluid you can store in this handy canister. Each shuttle contains at least one medium tier 2 storage slot where you can store the medium canister full of hydrazine. While it will require a lot of ammonium and hydrogen to completely fill the medium fluid and soil canister, it can save you from running out of fuel later. Even if you cannot get it completely filled, carrying at least some hydrazine in the canister can make the difference between a quick refuel or being faced with the difficult decisions in the scenario we discussed a moment ago. Today, you have learned about the 3 shuttles for space travel, how to operate them, and the thrusters required to propel them. You have also learned how to identify the various types of landing zones and how you can create your own. We also discussed how to avoid getting stranded during space travel and what to do if you do find yourself in that situation. In addition to next week's Quick Bite for unlimited solid fuel thruster usage, we will also take a rather long tour of nearly every destination located in the Silva planetary system. Until then, I'm Brandon, reminding you to keep looking to the stars.